Buy, sell or rent your property with Century 21 and you could win a brand new 2-bedroom apartment on the Sunshine Coast in Queensland. Visit c21win.com.au for your chance to win.
Hello, welcome to Your Property Empire. I'm Chris Gray. On tonight's show, a recent CoreLogic survey revealed that 70% of Australians believed it was a good time to be buying property. But how can this be so with prices already at record highs? Now, with Christmas Day less than a month away, is it too late to be selling your property in 2016, or could now be the perfect time? And which property markets are likely to be strong in 2017 and which are predicted to be struggling? Well, joining me tonight to give his opinions on our stories is Charles Tarbey, Chairman and owner of 2021 Australasia.
Oh, good boy.
To see you. I'll finally get things through. Bit of jet lag today. OK, let's start off just looking at 2016. What would you say are some of the biggest challenges that the property market's had?
They were pretty much at opposing ends. When you look at it, you had one part of the market that had a tremendous undersupply of stock, and then you had another market in Australia which had an oversupply of stock, due mainly to the mining crash. So you've got these two different marketplaces, and it's really quite extraordinary, especially when you're dealing with these people, these team members, who are in completely different marketplaces. At one point you're trying to go through the process of how to get more stock on, and at the other end you're trying to go through the process of how to educate a seller on bringing their price down because they've got too much competition. Really very... And that's been the most challenging thing, is getting the agents to adjust to that.
And probably not only just the agents, but also, I guess, the consumers out there, the buyers and sellers, because, look, we're talking property all day, every day, and we obviously know what's going on in the market, but a lot of the consumers are reading the paper and they're hearing about one property market. But for those that are in a quiet market, they're hearing about all these booming suburbs and they say, can't that be right? So it's hard for them to really understand, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. And I think that most of the time, though, when they're living in a certain area, and they've probably got family and friends that are in the same position. So I was referring to markets like Perth or like Darwin, or those areas, mining areas, where they've got family and friends who can't sell their homes because they've got negative equity. So they talk about it and it starts to filter out. And it's incredible how quickly a marketplace changes. You just only need a couple of small things, whether it's the Reserve Bank speaking out or whether a bank changes their policy on lending, and then there's this stillness in the marketplace and people start to go, well, you know, which way do I turn? So I think that's how people find out mostly about what's going on, is through the family and friends. If you listen to the stats are always talking about one particular area. When they talk about auction clearance rates, they really have no relevance to what's going on in terms of 90% of the market.
And again, is one transaction can change things, because it suddenly gives people the confidence that suddenly if something's selling over reserve, or suddenly something doesn't sell over reserve and it's suddenly going cheap, well, maybe it is worth turning up to auction now.
It is. Well, here's an example. On the weekend we had an office sell a property for a record price in the suburb of Earlwood. Now, you never hear much of Earlwood in Sydney. It's on the other side of Marrickville, on the outer west of the inner west, if you like, and that sold for $3,050,000. A property in Earlwood. Now, I used to live in Earlwood as a kid when I moved down from my country town of Crookwell, and, you know, the houses there were nice, and it was an area that was, well, not considered upmarket to any degree. But here you are now, and this just happened on the weekend when everything's supposed to be slowing down.
And again, buyers need to adjust themselves, and the sellers as well, because people will say, oh, look, $1 million, oh, that's a lot of money, or $3 million for a house now. Yeah. But once you get those prices, unless you get current-to-date information, you're always going to be chasing your tail, and then it's going to be $3.5 million and you still haven't bought. Yeah,
and you see that all of the time. The number of times people will say to you, and oh, my children can't afford to buy. And I keep saying, well, you know, it is tough. There's no doubt it's tough. And sometimes the salaries might have only been 4 times the price of a home years ago, and now they're 7 times the price of a home in certain locations. But the biggest problem I find is that most people don't want to buy where they can afford. They want to buy where they want to live. And this is the battle they will always have, particularly if they work in the city or close to the city. They want to buy close to the city, and it's almost impossible in some cases. So they've got to get out. They've got to go and find these suburbs that people keep talking negatively about. So I heard today in the newspaper, or was reading a Domain, sorry, not the newspaper, and they're talking about Punchbowl. Again, outer west, southwest of Sydney, Bankstown area, as being the next hot suburb. And Bankstown is an area that's been under a massive cloud because of shootings and all sorts of things. But people say, oh, I don't want to buy there. But those are sometimes the areas you've got to buy, and things change over a period of time.
The Coogis and Bondis used to be full of villains and stabbings and all that kind of stuff.
Really?
And
must have been Punchbowl, because I bought my first house in Punchbowl.
But also, people have got to just get on with it, because you can fight it and say, look, property prices are too expensive, it's not fair, it's not right, and it's going to crash. But unless you suddenly get on the ladder, it's suddenly going to be pretty stuff.
It is,
because there's low stock levels now. Do you see that continuing in 2017?
I don't... in the early part of next year, I do, just for the now period of time with Christmas and all coming on. I do think there's going to be a bit more stock come on, because mostly people are getting a little nervous. There is a sense of nervousness out there, as I mentioned a little earlier on, in some parts of Australia, because of messages that are coming out of banks, messages that are coming out of Reserve Bank of Australia, stories you're hearing about developers pulling the plug on developments, oversupply issues you're hearing. So people are starting to pay a bit of attention to that. But there are certain markets still where it's going to be tough because the stock levels are going to be low. But I do think around most of the country, stock levels will increase.
But again, you've got to be careful to say, just because Charles Tarbey said it on TV, just because there's going to be more stock, it doesn't mean that prices are necessarily going to drop. One of our guys says is quite often it slows down rather than goes down.
Yes.
So if tomorrow's price is still more expensive, even if there is more stock, you still need to go and take some action.
You do have to take action, and again, I push myself in that direction. I push my children in that direction. Just when you think the market's maybe peaking, I say, look, still buy. It's not a short-term decision. And there are lots of people who've been sitting on the fence. Chris, there are lots of people who unfortunately took the advice of people who talked about the bubble a year ago, 2 years ago, 3 years ago, and these people sold their properties because the crash was coming. And I feel sorry for people who did that when you go backwards and you look at some of the prices that they could have achieved if they kept their homes and apartments.
Now, we've talked over the last couple of weeks about people contemplating selling. Normally it's a 4-week campaign, so we haven't really got 4 weeks till Christmas now. What are some of the benefits, or should they not be selling now?
It's probably that they are the benefits. The fact that demand is still strong, and I don't think the demand's going to slow down considerably over Christmas. I think if people have it in mind to buy something, they will. And if the stock levels are declining, which again they haven't been great in terms of increases, and now they're starting to decline, those people that are on the market for sale are probably going to get their best example at what an auction should be like in terms of competitive bidding.
So, and look, I'm seeing exactly the same. There's plenty of people that are ready to buy and people that can move very quickly. So even if you haven't got a month to go, could be the way to get a bit of a Dutch auction happening just before Christmas Eve. Anyway, now it's time to jump to Tom Panos. He joins us from our Sydney CBD studio. Welcome, Tom.
Hi, Chris. How you going?
Mate, all good. We see you on Facebook all the time. You're busy as ever auctioning off properties at this time of year.
Oh, look, prices are crazy. They're still strong. Property on Saturday, 200,000 over reserve. Another one, 120,000 over reserve. And I just think to myself that, as Charles says, and by the way, I was listening very closely to what you were both talking about there, and my first property was in Punchbowl. I bought a very small one, I can't remember whether it was 1 or 2 bedroom unit on Victoria Road, Punchbowl. And the reality is, it's not where I wanted to live, but it's where I could afford to own a property. And it's a start. And when I hear, stories like Punchbowl's been in the press over the last few years more for the fact that there are gangs and there are, shootings and there are trouble. But the reality is that properties go up in every suburb. And I agree with Charles. I think that getting in the market doesn't mean that you've got to get your perfect property. Just get in.
And you were so before the trend, Tom. You got into Punchbowl before they'd invented gangs and guns and all that kind of stuff.
He was the starting point. He was the starting point.
Maybe I was the cause.
Yeah, you were, Tom.
Let's jump into number one then, Tom.
Right. Property number one is in Enmore, which is a suburb in the inner west. So we've got 2 New South Wales properties now. The first one's in Enmore, in Camden Street. This property, highly unlikely it's not going to sell because everything in Newtown this year has sold. Well, most of them have sold. I think everyone that I've auctioned has sold. 3rd of December, so I want to keep my eye now. I want to see if people are going to be at this property or they're going to be at Westfield shopping. I still think that there's a lot of demand, is what Charles is saying. Nice wide 9-metre frontage, 3 bedrooms. It's on 347 square metres of land, which in most parts of Australia they'd say that's small, but I've got to tell you, in Enmore, that's fairly significant. So 83 Camden Street in Enmore, and check that out on realestate.com.au.
Certainly looks beautiful on the screen, Tom. Let's jump on to number 2.
Okay, property number 2. Now, this property here, I actually remember it. I was an underbidder of this property a few years ago, 16 Croydon Street, Petersham, and I got to tell you, it is a beautiful property, an Art Deco block of 4, and Christian Leung, who I've actually said on Facebook before, is probably the best dressed real estate agent in the country, and he's an ex-Macquarie banker, now one of the hottest Sydney real estate agents. He's been appointed to market this property and hopefully sell it on auction on the 10th of December. But it's a beautiful Art Deco building. You could go to the council and ask to do a strata subdivision, and you could end up having 4 2-bedroom apartments in, I would say, the best spot in Petersham. The inner west is a hot marketplace, but I have to tell you, Chris, I actually think Petersham's got more upside than other inner west suburbs. It hasn't got the, it hasn't had the boom of, say, a Newtown or an Annandale. So check that property out, 16 Croydon Street.
Wonderful. Certainly looks good. And not many blocks of 4 still around. Tom, quick question before we go. A lot of people think that agents live the high life, they've got flash cars, flash suits and the rest of it. Is that really the reality, though?
I think that the income is split between good agents and bad agents, and the good agents, I'd say there's only about 10 to 20% of them, and then the rest are the agents that struggle. So the reality is that most real estate agents don't make a lot of money. A small number of real estate agents make incredible money, and I think that real estate is the highest paid hard work and it's the lowest paid easy work, and those that make the good money deserve it because they're a marketer, they're a social media expert, they're a negotiator, they've got to they've basically got to be a psychologist to a vendor throughout the process. They've got to do so many things that I actually think the good ones deserve what they get paid.
Tom, you've got a great line for everything. You should be on stage one of these days.
Should be.
Eric, good to see you, Tom. We'll see you again next week. Now, we're going to take a short break, but we'll be back soon.
A rental property can be a rewarding investment, but even with great tenants, there'll always be life's unavoidable accidents and uncertainties. Standard building insurance may not cover damage caused by tenants or loss of rent, leaving you out of pocket. Terry Shear is Australia's leading landlord insurance specialist, with award-winning landlord insurance from $1 a day to protect your property and rental income. Call Terry Shear today or go online.
Bowel cancer is Australia's second biggest cancer killer. It affects men and women, young and old. It often develops without any warning signs. But 90% of cases can be treated successfully if detected early. So don't wait until it's too late. Talk to your GP or pharmacist today and support Bowel Cancer Australia to help save lives. Donate today at bowelcanceraustralia.org.
Cruise Europe's rivers in style for less. Voted best value by Cruise Critic. Evergreen's 15-day river cruise from only $4,845. Hurry, call your Evergreen expert today.
Our world is becoming more interconnected than ever, opening up new opportunities and vulnerabilities. But what if we could stop mishaps from happening? At Hitachi, we're co-creating stronger security solutions for the Internet of Things, so we can predict and prevent threats to our real and virtual worlds while moving social innovation forward. The future is open to suggestions. This is social innovation. Hitachi, inspire the next.
Select 2 pairs from our $199 range and get free polarising in your second pair. Hurry, offer ends Sunday, December 4. Should have gone to Specsavers.
Where are your parents?
Why would humans leave Earth for Mars forever?
I'm allergic to the planet.
Nasonex Allergy targets multiple allergic responses. It gives more effective hay fever relief than antihistamine tablets. Enjoy Earth.
There is a first time for everything. A new step forward, a big step forward. It's okay to be nervous. It comes with the territory. Your first interview. Not just new people, but the right people. That's what's important.
So, what do you think?
There is a first time for everything. You're hired.
Susan wants funeral insurance to help make it easier for her family during a difficult time. She can either leave getting the right policy to chance or leave it to Choosy. Choosy is a free insurance comparison service. Tell Choosy's team of choosers how much cover your family will need to afford the funeral you want and let the comparing begin. That way, you can choose the funeral insurance policy that's right for you. Get a quote today and you can win a $500 gift card. Call Choosy on 13 16 24 to compare, choose and apply.
Welcome back to the show. CoreLogic research into housing sentiment showed that almost 70% of Australians think now is a good time to be buying a dwelling despite rising prices. So with prices so high at the moment, what makes property such an appealing investment?
Oh, I was thinking about that the other day, and a young bloke lobbed into my office and dropped a bottle of red wine on my desk, and he used to work for me in IT maybe about 10 years ago, and he's only a young lad, since got married, early 30s, and he rang me about 6 to 8 weeks ago and said, would I go out and help him with an auction they want to buy? I said, look, if it's not a C21 auction, I'm happy to come out and help, you know. And so I lobbed along. I let the agent know I was there as an agent and I was just helping these people out, and they got really nervous about bidding. But they ended up buying the property and they bought it at what I thought was a really good price, Inner West, under $1 million terrace. And I said to him the other day when he dropped the bottle of wine in, I said, how's it feel? He said, it's mine, it's ours. We can do what we want. We don't have to move out anymore. We can change our furniture around. We can just enjoy the property. And I think about that. And if you rent a property, if you're a serial renter, I know you are, but if you're a serial renter only without investing in real estate, you miss out on so many things. And there's a special joy in owning real estate. I don't know what it is. I've got some properties that are not great investments. My money would be better elsewhere. I know it. Everybody else knows it. But when I drive past some of these places and I look at them, I just go, wow, I'm so glad I have that.
Look, it's funny saying that because I still remember the first day of moving into mine. I was 22. I bought one 8 times my income rather than 3 times they talk about. Beg, borrow, steal, have 2 renters in to pay for it, and I had a £100 IKEA mattress and a case of beer, a warm case of beer because I was in England. Yeah. But that's all you want. And it is that great Australian dream or the Pommy dream or whatever else.
I do. I think there's something special about it. I think there's something special about owning real estate, and I really do hope more people are encouraged to put themselves in that position where they can feel that.
Now, obviously, there's so many things in the media that scare people off from doing it, and procrastination, it's the worst thing in the world for your wealth. All this Trump stuff that was going on.
Oh, yes.
Is anything going to come of that? Does it really matter? Should people watch all this stuff?
Well, firstly, with procrastination, I think we should put that off till next week to talk about that.
Yeah, we'll talk about that.
With Donald Trump, and I've received calls from various press members about that. There was a lot of press in New Zealand about, not so much New Zealand, but in the US about buying in New Zealand, and a lot of the guys picked up the stories coming out of the US that that's where they should invest, or in Australia. And I can tell you that our website hits out of the US into Australia have increased, and they've increased probably by about, when I looked at the numbers, it was 55,000 over 69. So tell me, as an accountant, what is that percentage increase? It's probably about 8-9% or whatever it is higher, and that's been in the first 2 weeks of November compared to a quarter prior to that. So definitely there's an interest in real estate in Australia out of the US. Whether it's Donald Trump driven or not, who knows?
So do people generally think Australia is a safe place to go and invest? But again, what about the Australians thinking there's stuff going on in the media? Again, whether it's our election or someone else's, it's just scary stuff, isn't it?
It happens because even when the elections were on here in Australia, people stop. They stop sometimes buying what's going to happen if Labor gets in or if Liberal get in. And realistically, we've got no control over any of those things. And even if they do get in, we've got no control. And I think there was a big scare campaign with Trump. And I don't see it as unfolding to anything of a great degree here in Australia. In fact, they're talking about it in a positive manner. If you look at resources sectors, maybe they might get a kick this time.
Now, just moving it quickly onto property, we're talking about, look, a lot of people should contemplate selling before the end of the year. I guess when they're looking at an agent, just like Tom said before, there's good agents and bad agents.
Yeah.
Given the economy at the moment, what type of agent do you think people should be going for?
And that is a very, very easy question to answer, but not an easy... it's not easy to notice it, because real estate agents create perception. And that perception is that they might be incredibly successful. You talked about cars and the way they dress and so on. And then there's the agents that can take property for sale and put it on the market, but it's not really priced to be on the market. It's so overpriced that you wouldn't even call it a listing. You'd call it a home on display. That's what I tell my team. So I say to a lot of people, the perception is if you see agents with a lot of for sale signs out, that generally means that they're not doing that well. Because if they were, they'd have sold signs on their properties. So I think if you pick it based on their results, not their activity, which is a critical thing. The other thing I notice also is agents say, I've been in real estate for 20 years. It could be 20 years, 1 year at a time, and they've grown in such a small manner and really learnt nothing in that period of time.
Or they're behind the times,
yeah,
not into the technology.
The number of years is not the issue. It's the agent's experience in the terms of how much time they've been in real estate. So if somebody's been there for a year and they've demonstrated their ability to market property and sell it and put a sold sticker on it, that's who you use. You use those agents, activity-driven versus performance-based. So I'm always about the performance of an agent, not the activity of an agent. And this is something I drive in my organisation so much, but it's very hard to get it through because sometimes agents feel as though they're going to go through a great deal of loss by letting a sign come down and a competitor putting up a sign, even though that property in 4 to 6 weeks still isn't sold, or maybe even longer. They still feel this loss, that they've lost a position in marketing. So performance is the key, not activity.
And again, it's some of the best agents. I think you were on the show when we had Michael Pallier, who sells the most expensive, like $70 million packer kind of places. But again, he's not big and flash, not a big expensive car. He's just very, very genuine.
He is, and that's the difference. But he's got that history, he's got that background of being able to get that property and taking it to the right people and selling it without all the huff and puff. And this is what I'm saying. It's not about the activity or the perception. It's about the results.
Sounds good. Now, talking about results, let's jump into the auction clearance rates.
Yeah, they're pretty good still, much higher than this time last year, as you heard Tom talking about it. But again, we've got to remind everybody that auction clearance rates are taken on properties that go to auction, not properties that are for sale. And that's the big difference between the two. And the properties that go for auction will only represent a small percentage of the marketplace. But in the climate that we're in right now, they're still pretty high compared to last year. 76% was a clearance rate this time last week. When we looked this time last year, it was 60.1%. That's a big difference. Sydney came in at the best at 81.9%. And that was followed by Melbourne at 76.9%. They're not massive clearance rates in the other capital cities. They're steady. But overall, 76 is pretty good.
Sounds good. And moving on to homes advertised for sale.
Yeah, that's down. We had a couple of weeks, a few weeks, where we had a modest climb, Chris, but now it's dropped back. I guess we've got to expect that with Christmas coming up. A 0.41% decline. New Zealand had a dramatic decline in stock of 10.2%. Now, generally, when their stock is up, ours has been down. So this is the first week in a long time I've watched where both countries are down in stock, but New Zealand significantly. And I think that they probably need more stock because that's still a very hot market right across the country over there.
OK, and moving on to the rent price movements.
Here's an interesting one. Now, the worst performing capital city and the best performing capital city, one was Darwin and the other was Perth. Now, generally those two are in decline. But Perth had a decline of 1.4%, but Darwin had an increase of 1.85%, higher than Sydney at 0.41%. But overall, I guess at the end of the day, those marketplaces are very, very steady. We've had a decline of 0.95% when you look right across the country, but it's still up 2.68% since the start of the year.
And finally, the vacancy rates.
Very steady and good to hear with that. Sydney again came in second week in a row, hasn't moved, 1.39%. Melbourne, just slightly higher than last week, it was 3.01. It's 3.32 this week. And Perth, which I'm really happy to say was 9.4 last week, stayed at 9.4. So it's 4.7 when you look at the vacancy rates overall. I'd like to see Perth come back because when I looked at the rent movement, Perth had the greatest decline in the year to date. It's had a 19% decline in rent values since January. So it's one of the capital cities that has probably got a great chance to bounce back a lot quicker than others. So you know how you look at it. You look at the worst one, you think, well, that's got to bounce back at some point, and it'll probably be one of the first that bounces back.
OK, sounds good. Now, just before we go, there's a reasonable amount of talk about tightening lending conditions again.
Yes.
What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, look, some of the banks are really starting to speak out. I know one bank, nameless, said the other day, I know we don't lend on that type of property. Credit came down and said that type of property's out for the moment. I heard of one bank looking at putting up their interest rates and maybe did on Friday. So I think there is definitely a movement there for the banks to start scaring people, which is not a bad thing.
And again, you need to look at the right kind of properties that you're not getting into volatile one-horse towns because they're more likely to affect those ones.
Chris, if you can't borrow money and then look at your repayments as being 125% of what they really are, if you can't afford that 125%, don't do it.
Charles Tarbey, good to see you as always. Thanks for joining us at home. We'll be back again next week. Until then, I'm Chris Gray. Good night.
The information featured in this program is general in nature and therefore should not be relied upon. Guests appearing on the program may have commercial arrangements with some of the companies mentioned. Before making any investment, insurance or financial planning decisions, you should consult a licensed professional who can advise whether your decision is appropriate for you.